how can ordinary people get more adventure in their lives? Who are all these weird people climbing insane mountains, flying in wingsuits, and what lies between the gap of people with private jets and unlimited amazing equipment and just ordinary people with a job? And how can we explore the edges of our capabilities and have more fun without these unrealistic additional requirements? Well, that is a topic very dear to my heart, so welcome to the Growth Mindset podcast. I am someone who loves to travel and have adventure, and I wouldn't define myself as someone spectacularly amazing or born to do great things, but I have managed to hitchhike across Kazakhstan, I've visited North Korea, and I did finish an entire ultramarathon with a broken leg, which was really dumb, but also sort of impressive, and I'm a bit confused about the whole situation there. Anyway, on my first trip by myself across Europe, I was given a book. It was called The Mood of Future Joys, and it was by some bloke called Alastair Humphreys. And it was about his 4-year trip by bicycle across the world. And what I loved about this book was that it wasn't someone who was like this heroic adventurer doing something that I couldn't do. It was just a curious bloke from England who one day nervously got on his bike and started riding, and he didn't stop, and it took him to amazing places. And since then, Alastair Humphreys has become the National Geographic Adventurer of the Year, and he's written several other books on adventure and some great children's books if you've got kids. Alastair pioneered the concept of Microadventures, which is the idea that you don't need to go halfway across the world to have a life-changing adventure, and you could simply just go camping outside one evening in the week, maybe a mile from your house, or climb a tree or jump in a river and do these little things that actually just bring more adventure and fun into your life. There are many simple joys to being a human that are completely within reach that we forget about. And we have this expectation that you need at least a 4-hour flight somewhere to do anything slightly exciting. Alastair's books have genuinely been some of the most impactful reading I've had in my life that have really defined the things that I've gone on to do, and really helped me build my mindset and growth mindset. In fact, I loved his book so much that I have bought his book for so many of my friends. It is the book that I have given to the most people out of any book in the whole world. So I do highly recommend that you check him out. Since I began this podcast, Alastair Humphreys has been on my list of people that I must get on the podcast and interview. And eventually, I've got over my starry-eyed fandom to send him an email and see if he'd come on. And 1 month later, here he is on the show, bestowing us with some amazing wisdom and tales of fun and adventure. He's really cultivated a curious and adventurous mindset that leads to a great conversation that I think we can all learn from. So without further ado, I give to you my interview with Alastair Humphreys. So, Alastair, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for gifting my books. That's always lovely to hear.
Oh, my pleasure. So I'd love to cover lots of things. And I was thinking like the why, then the how and the what of adventure, from like the small steps that you might take to be more adventurous to making it a major part of your life like you have done. And starting with a few quick fire questions that I just think can like set the tone. And note that besides cycling around the world for 4 years, Alastair has ran the Marathon de Sables and rode across the Atlantic. So these are some nice questions to give us a bit of a taste of an idea of the things that you learn from doing that. So firstly, blue planet or life on Earth?
Ooh, life on Earth.
Okay. Then extreme hot or extreme cold?
Whichever one I'm not in at the time.
Yeah, I know that feeling. Extreme rowing or extreme running?
I would take extreme being punched in the face over extreme rowing. So definitely extreme running.
Interesting. I wasn't expecting that. Reading or writing?
Oh, reading. I really like reading and I really like having written, but I don't like actually writing, which is why it's nice to do a podcast in the middle of the day. You're saving me from having to write a book right now. So
you're very welcome. Pizza or pasta?
Pizza. I think the problem with pasta is that I've had far too much experience of stodgy pasta cooked in a camping stove, shoveled down with something not very tasty in tents all around the world. Whereas when you're out on an adventure, have a rubbish pizza in your tent. So in my mind, pizza feels like proper treat restaurant food. Pasta feels like stodgy stuff to fill me up in a tent.
Yeah. Thanks for the elaboration there. That was very handy. Yeah. We moved into a flat where we don't have an oven. So we bought pizzas and then we realized we had to like microwave them and then fry them to have like a solid bottom. It's not ideal.
No, that doesn't sound good.
On to a harder question then. How do you define success and happiness, and are you currently achieving them?
What I've been really working towards over a number of years is to define success as an internal measure rather than an external competitive measure. And I think when I try to measure success externally by comparing myself to other people or to other metrics, then I am definitely not happy. I'm perpetually chasing more and ambitious for more and jealous of more. And when it's internal, then that's much better. So yeah, what I've been working on over a few years, I've been reading quite a lot of Stoic books about trying to set your own internal values. And so long as you're matching those, that's success. And that's a good nudge on the road towards being happy.
Very nice introspective way of doing it. So what are your internal measures that you then try to keep up?
In terms of trying to define success, I try to maximize my potential and my opportunities and to try and do things that have purpose. So they're not entirely just selfish, but they have some hopefully wider benefits as well. But I definitely in my own life have found a real conflict between striving for success and accepting my life and being happy and and I find if I push one of those up, then the other one goes down a bit. So I suppose trying to balance the jigsaw in the middle of having the courage to change the things that I can change, the serenity to accept those that I cannot, and the wisdom to know the difference between the two. And if I can get that in sync, then things are generally good.
And certainly with like ego is super useful for making you do stuff and having like the faith in yourself to go and do things. But then it's also bad to then chase things for the wrong reason. It's a very confusing one. You definitely need it, but it's definitely bad when you use it incorrectly. But yeah, I'm doing a bit of a series on the ego at the moment, which has been quite fun.
Adventures are a really good testing ground for this because I think you need a bit of a lack of ego to be doubting yourself, that you want to challenge yourself and push yourself and force you to go on some sort of big challenging adventure. But you need sufficient of an ego to have the confidence to set out the front door and actually begin it. And then once you're out on the adventure, if you've set yourself a suitably high goal, then somewhere along the line, you're going to be absolutely humbled and broken by huge, uncaring landscapes you're in. And that helps you take a long, hard look at your ego. So yes, a good measuring stick of lots of things, I think, the world of adventure, and particularly going on a solo adventure. Do you agree?
I would 100% agree. Nailed it, which is interestingly pretty much the perfect answer to my next question, which was trying to then go into the why of adventures. Like, why should we be adventurous? Rather than just telling people like what to do, is in like really understanding how it impacts your life on like a broader scale. And I don't know if you have any other things to add to that, but that was a really good answer already.
I'll add a bit more to this in terms of the why of going on adventures. And there's so many different reasons for going on adventures, which I guess is why adventure's popular to loads of people in loads of different aspects of life. But the part that's relevant to your question, I think, in my case, was that going on adventures has been so good for just trying to know myself, to realize that I'm not amazing, but equally to give me the self-confidence to think, oh, I have actually endured and persevered and used my initiative and overcome things. And that's given me a lot of self-confidence for other things in life, for trying to write books or start a business or things like that. So I think it's going on a adventure is just a really good way of knowing yourself. You're not as bad as you think, and you're probably not as amazing as you dream of, and just you're somewhere in the middle, but you keep persevering and you'll do all right. So it's been very, very helpful for my self-confidence. I think that's one of the main aspects of adventure for me. I'm sure it'd be different for other people.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a very humbling and grounding experience, but in the same way, encouraging and motivating what you can do. Yeah, I would certainly recommend it for anyone, whatever their age. Obviously, we talk about like young people going and doing it to get life experience and like experiencing culture, but it doesn't matter how old you are, I think. And one of the most useful things I think I had from therapy was realizing that it wasn't a thing to feel guilty about, wanting to go on an adventure all the time, and that I probably need to go and do some form of adventure each year just to like be chilled. Otherwise I just get a bit frustrated. So then getting into like the how of adventure and like your process, I'm guessing from like your initial talks of like the cool adventures that you've done, you just had so many questions of like, how to get there that it maybe became a bit frustrating and you kept on answering it in different ways? And what were like the things that you thought people wanted to hear of how, and then what were the things they actually needed to hear of like how to start doing more adventure?
That's a good question. Yeah, I find with my talks, but also the emails I receive, that if you get asked the same question loads of times, it's kind of boring, but equally it's kind of useful because you're realizing, oh, lots of people don't know this thing. Therefore, I should probably turn that into a blog post or a book or include it in my talk. And there is definitely recurrent themes that come up time and again. Generally, there are several things that come up time and again about people trying to get into adventure. And there's the certain barriers that come up at time and again, which is a perceived lack of time, a perceived lack of money, a lack of expertise, and a feeling that growing an audience and building a brand and making a career of adventure sometimes should come before the actual adventure itself. And I try and address those by, generally in life, people either have a lack of time or a lack of money, roughly speaking. And so the lack of time I tried to tackle by encouraging the idea of microadventures, of just trying to squeeze in short, simple, local adventures wherever you live. And the notion there being that even a tiny bit of adventure is better than doing nothing at all. The lack of money I tried to address in the book Brand Adventures, which is based on the idea of, if you want to go and have an adventure, save up £20 a week or whatever you can afford. But let's say if you can put aside £20 a week for a year into a separate bank account, by the end of the year, you've got £1,000 and you've got a whole year to prepare, to research, to come up with ideas, to tell your boss, blah, blah, blah. And then by the end of the year, you've got £1,000, and £1,000 is easily enough money to go have a really big adventure. The perceived lack of expertise, or that adventure's only for a certain type of person who's got a certain type of skills and expertise, I think is an unfortunate mental block. But generally on people's first adventure, no one has a clue what they're doing. So one of the hardest parts of adventure is daring yourself to get out into the world and face situations which you are not yet prepared for. And the only way you can get prepared for them is by going through them, overcoming them, surprising yourself, boosting your self-confidence, and then things become easier and easier. And the final of those four that I mentioned, for people who would think of adventure as a means into a job or a career or a brand or fame or whatever than that is, I think the key there is to forget all about that and just go do something that feels really big, exciting and meaningful to you. And then perhaps after that, the stories might come if you choose to do so, but focus on the adventure first rather than everything else.
Yeah. A good piece of advice from someone that got paid a lot to do speeches, being like, best thing for learning how to talk well is to have something to say. And doing stuff is the first part of that, for sure. Kind of feel like we could go into each of those four in more depth, in that if those are the areas where you get like a lot of questions. What are the three biggest questions when it comes to time, would you say, that people have? Because I feel like time is a very confusing one, as we just constantly more and more filled with things that we need to do urgently, and we have less and less of it. Like, how do you help people with that? And certainly as you're getting older, you have like relationships or kids and things, but when you're younger, it's like you have to be successful instantly right now, because of otherwise it's going to be too late.
Yeah. So generally speaking, I think until you retire and are old, by which time your knees are knackered and you've got a blue rinse in your hair and you're going to the bingo. But essentially, until you retire, throughout your life, you will always have less and less time available, because as you get older, you always have more commitments on your time. And therefore, the amount of time you have now is the best amount of time you have for an adventure. And therefore, you should just make the most of what time you have right now and go and do something. And the way to try and do that is to try and schedule in time in your calendar, because small little things that just come into your calendar can really break up chunks of time. So if you're serious about having an adventure, you need to find a blank chunk in your calendar, block it off and defend it with your life. And then around that, I think it's really important just to try to look at the time. You could just quit your job and clear off and have a big adventure, but assuming you want to keep normal life as well, I think then you have to take an honest look at the routines of your days and weeks and see where you're wasting time that you could use more efficiently and then save up a bit of adventure time. And then finally, beyond that, is to just look at the tiny little margins of time, the little bits of confetti of time that are dotted around your days and weeks, and use that to get out and have a little bit of adventure. For example, for the last 3 years, I've been climbing a tree once a month, which is a tiny activity. It's a 20-minute activity, but I probably wouldn't have got round to it if I didn't schedule it in my calendar for the first Wednesday of every month. And that has been but it's a tiny little activity, but go climb a tree, the same tree every time, and you just notice the seasons changing. You notice spring coming or summer coming, the autumn coming. You have a little time to reflect on what you've achieved in the last month, a bit of time to imagine what you might try and get on with in the next month till you return down from the tree. Then you climb back down the tree and get on with life again. And that's a tiny little bit of example of just filling in the confetti of my days, but has been disproportionately valuable and rewarding to me in terms of the time it takes. So yeah, looking, I guess, to the adventure to time ratio is an important thing to do as well.
That's a really nice way of putting it, like the little moments. And I think that's also a really good answer for money around like all those like little bits of money that are kind of just being wasted in different places, and how you can like work out what your like ratio of money to adventure being used is.
Yeah, I think the money to adventure ratio is a really important thing to look at as well. I spent quite a lot of time chasing £1 million for an expedition to the South Pole. So that involved just a lot of PowerPoint presentations and meetings in offices. But then I also spent 4 years cycling around the world and spent £7,000. So I think if money is some sort of limiting factor in your adventure, as it is for most people, then I think looking at the money to adventure ratio is really important. For example, you could just right now get a little rucksack on your back and a raincoat and empty out whatever's left in your fridge and then walk 400 miles from your front door. You could write a book about that. It'd be a brilliant adventure and it would be very cheap. Or you could spend years trying to raise £1 million to go and have a 4-week adventure in Antarctica. So yeah, looking at the money to adventure ratio is important.
I think one of the fallacies people fall into with time is using it whilst you're young to try and earn more money so that you can then like have the freedom to go on an adventure, by which point it might cost you more because you have more like needs and things. And when you're younger, you can just sleep in a tent or like just get away with things a lot more that you maybe wouldn't be able to when you're older. And also your earning potential when you're younger is generally a lot lower. And so I just think it's quite interesting. When I was like 8, I'd get paid £1 for sort of mowing the lawn and doing like quite a lot of work for a few hours. And I thought I was putting a lot of time in, and then like just changed that to when I sort of started getting minimum wage. It was like, okay, I'm actually earning quite a lot of money, but actually now earning like £300 a month seems like nothing. And then it just keeps on going, leveling up, and putting so much time into sort of working on the minimum wage now for me seems so stupid when I could have actually just been going and having adventures. And so I think I wasted like a few months of my gap year trying to earn money, which I just didn't need to do. And I just don't think it's just a concept that we don't quite have in our heads properly until you've gone past it.
It comes with the caveat, of course, that you need X amount of money to live. But if you are privileged enough to have X amount of money to live, then yeah, I think you're far better going on a long, cheap adventure now than saving up for longer and having a shorter but more expensive adventure. Definitely. It's often quite grim and miserable at the time, but I think most people's fondest adventure memories are when they're properly dirt bagging it and roughing it when they're young. And I think they're just the most wonderful memories that are far better than saving up 10 times the amount of money and staying in a load of hotels in the long run.
And I think you have harder expectations to meet as well when you're spending a lot of money. You feel like you have to be really happy the whole time. And then like, there's still going to be things that aren't quite so good. And then that makes you more annoyed. Whereas when you're just grateful for everything, you are literally grateful for everything. And it's great. So a confusing one. But yeah, definitely, like I say, last summer I just went cycling for like 7 weeks around Europe and spent like 10 euros a day. It was great. And I've got a friend walking around the coast of Britain at the moment for charity, and he's trying to spend like £5 a day on like food, and he's got like a year of adventure on such a small budget, which I think one of the issues is that you see like adverts for just going to like crazy places where you have to spend lots of money on Instagram. You think that's what you need to do. Or remember last year I paid like 120 quid to do the zip wire in Wales, like the longest zip wire in the UK or something. And it wasn't that interesting. I had to queue for 2 hours to do it. Had like this sort of 2 minutes on this zip wire that it was fine, completely fine. And then like in the afternoon, got in the sea completely free, had a better time getting in the sea. And it's just like, we just see things and like think that's what we want, when actually like often something that's different is better.
Completely agree with that. And also your friend who's walking around Britain, who is that, by the way? You should give him a shout out.
Jamie Lloyd.
Jamie Lloyd. I gave you a mind blank there, put you on the spot. But yeah, another thing to highlight of what he's doing is, well, assuming he's from Britain, is he just walked out his front door and began. And that's immediately saved him £1,000 on having to fly to Thailand to walk around Thailand. So you save £1,000, live on £5 a day. You bought yourself 200 days of adventure time there by just doing something that's local as well.
It's amazing. I mean, I've been watching his stories every day, and it's just so much epic nature in Britain that he's just seeing, and like so many sort of small things, just because when you watch like Blue Planet and you see these crazy amounts of whales or something, he's had so many of those moments of like beaches completely full of seals, or just like getting lost in flocks of birds and things, just because he spends so much time outside on the edge of the sea. And yeah, it's just been really interesting watching that, being like, wow, Britain, there's so much really nice stuff going on. He's just putting so much time into it. It's really cool. So back to the 4 things. I feel like there are some other questions about money that we didn't quite address, perhaps, that you've been asked. So any other advice on the topic of money for adventure? Although maybe we did go into it quite well.
My thinking always is, if you can make your adventure cheaper, it will become longer. If you can make it cheaper, it will probably become more dirt bag and more exciting. And if you can make your adventure cold, slow and miserable, then you are having an adventure. You're not on a holiday. So all of these things, they all point in the directions of just go as simple as you can, go as cheap as you can, go as local as you can, and go right now.
I'm glad I asked. Yeah, that was a really good summary. Nice one. Okay. And then going on to the third one, expertise to be an adventurer, because this is something that I think our first topic around ego and just sort of thinking of yourself as something, it's part of the identity. And there's just like a bit of a gap on like who you want to be versus who you are now. And it's just like, actually go and do it. So how do you help people address those questions?
I think a lot of people get into adventure through reading books of adventurers who've gone off and done something cool out in the world. And you read that and think, wow, that's amazing. I want a slice of that action. And that's certainly the case for me. When I was a young adult, I loved reading these big adventure books. And then I've gone on and I now write books about my own adventures. And you're saying you've kindly read 1 or 2, and that's fantastic. And hope that encourages you to have adventures, blah, blah, blah. And on it goes. So there's a hazard, I think, though, when you read these books of journeys and successful, heroic, handsome adventurers doing crazy stuff. You think, wow, these people are amazing. They're not like me. My experience is that, having now become good friends with lots of people who make adventures as a living, they and me all fall into exactly the same category of pretty much every single person I know who's gone off to do big adventures has begun it because in some way they felt like a loser or a misfit in life and want to try and prove something to themselves or to the world. And therefore, if you're interested in doing adventures, but you feel that you're not quite up to the task, then actually you are perfectly qualified to just do what all the rest of us have done, which is to test yourself, go out there and challenge yourself and dare yourself to do something different and difficult. And you'll probably be surprised at how well you can cope with it. So the old imposter syndrome, I think, runs very strongly in the world of adventure.
Definitely. One of the things I really liked about your book was how human you were, like the amount of struggles that you did have of like mundane things, which was really nice, and was like, yeah, I actually really relate to this, but still appreciating the beauty of what you were doing. So it was very motivating, whilst actually like didn't put you on some superhuman pedestal of like, okay, I wouldn't be able to do what he's doing level. And I think that's one of the things I really try to do with my podcast is have epic people on who are like Olympians or like CEOs of big businesses, but understand that they were just a normal person that like was born with every opportunity that most other people have and just chose to do harder things, which are just small choices that you could all do. So yeah, thanks for that.
I remember reading one of Barack Obama's books, and in that he talked about one day just being in the Oval Office, just looking around thinking, what on earth am I doing here? This is ridiculous. And I figured that if even he, the most suave, switched on, savvy man on the planet, if he's feeling like a fraud, then we probably all are. But yeah, I think being honest. When I started writing about adventures, I decided from the start I was just going to be really honest about all the stuff that I found really hard. So there's probably too much in my books of me sitting by the road, eating a banana sandwich and crying. But I decided just to try to be honest about that. And weirdly, the more honest you are about the weaknesses, the more they gradually turn into your superpowers.
Yeah, I found that bit with myself of some of my writing. It's been really helpful for me to like actually ask people to find out what they think their weaknesses are, but by actually just listing all the things that I've done as mistakes and things as well, and just sort of be like, hey, I've actually been pretty successful, but these are all the things that I've messed up. And you've probably been messing stuff up as well if you just look inside. I think it's really improved my writing. Okay, then the final subject of like the career job framing of like finding meaning doing adventure or fame or like just enough money to carry on doing it. What are the things that people expect? What are the biggest questions? And then like, how would they actually get into having some form of sustainable adventure career where they might actually make some money or just enjoy it on the long term?
I think the first difficulty is that no one is going to be interested in you until you've gone off and done something interesting. And therefore it's up to you to somehow solve the problem of how do you get time and the money in place to go off and do something sufficiently interesting so that when you come home, you can then begin to start to monetize that. So that's a challenge that everyone has to face through whatever their individual circumstances. And there's no shortcut to that beyond what we've said several times on here of try and go as far as you can, as cheaply as you can, and as slowly as you can. And that's generally a good starting point for a decent, honest adventure. Now you've got the interesting story. The next thing you need to be able to do is to use that story in some way to do two things. To one, grow an audience, and then hopefully two, from that to earn some money from it. And you can do that by being entertaining, by being inspiring, or by being informative, by sort of teaching people something along the way. So there's lots of different aspects that you can then go down to try and tell your story, which then lead off to different routes of the skills you need. So you need to then find some sort of skill for communicating, which might be speaking or writing or photos or video, or increasingly probably a combination of all those things. And then the money side of things, you need to try to be realistic that when you start, you're not going to have any money. So you're going to have a normal way of earning money until the money from adventure can mean you can start to give up bits of your day job. And then the final thing, I think, is to be realistic about your expectations. I think there's a tendency with lots of careers to think, I want to do X because so-and-so is awesome. And that might be, I don't know, Bear Grylls in the adventure world, or Elon Musk in the business world, or Eliud Kipchoge in the running world, whatever it is. But I think trying to then measure your life by the freak outliers is a disaster. So if you can get to yourself to a point where you're doing something you enjoy, you're adding some value to the world, and you are earning enough money to stay alive from it, then that would be a very good measure of success. To go back to your first question of how I define success.
Yeah, thanks. It is one of those issues that I find a bit tricky around. If you go all in on something, it might be more likely to be successful versus you might not get that much success straight away and give up and not do it at all, even compared to if you sort of keep a job and have it as your side hustle. And there's no right answer on that side. I think there's no good argument either way, but I definitely think for most people, being more adventurous and having a normal income is a better way to start, and just less lonely. And yes, I just give up altogether. And the question I was thinking was, what if you were back in your 25-year-old shoes, but like now having just returned from cycling around the world? I don't know if you're 25 or like slightly older or younger, but having just finished your like stage one of doing something worthy of being an adventurer-ish, and then planning to start sort of making your way from that, what do you think you'd have done now compared to what you actually did 20 years ago-ish?
So one thing I sometimes think about is I nearly started podcasting in 2006. And in fact, I did upload some of my musings about cycling through Africa to Apple Podcasts back in 2006. And I kind of imagine how things might have been different had they gone big on podcasting in 2006 rather than waiting till 2019. Like, moving that forward, if I was starting today, I would try to take a punt on what direction of storytelling was going to be really popular a decade from now and gamble on that, even if it's not yet the successful one. That is, of course, a gamble, because I also, however many years ago, had a MySpace account. So imagine if I poured all of my efforts into building my MySpace account. So the flip side of that would be to stick to something which I think is reliably going to be around in 10 or 20 years, which is building an email list of people who are interested in what you do and send out interesting stuff via email. I think that's an old-fashioned technology that will definitely be around for a while. So take a gamble on something new and surprising, and then also just stick to the basics and get building slowly from the bottom on those.
Yeah, I think there is always an advantage to being early on things. But then if you look at the speed of new trends coming up, the amount of time it took for podcasting to get big versus TikTok grew big in 2 years, and then is the next thing going to sort of grow really big in like 6 months or something? Is it going to be like a 10-year thing? And like TikTok has really changed as well, as in what used to work well no longer does. But I think in all of those things, there's a very big difference between like commodity and community, I feel, in terms of you'll see people that are like travel vloggers or something, and like they'll just do some like crazy review of some spectacular looking hotel and they'll get like 1 million views, but then most of their things will struggle to get like a few thousand. Whereas as other people that just have a bit more comedy and a bit more personality, then they just always get more views. So if you just work on your craft and make sure you're always fostering community and not just providing just a commodity of like just information or something as you do it, then life gets better. Which I think you've been quite good at.
It's also worth really focusing on the boring, long, steady upwards trudge rather than chasing the instant million views and likes, because all these platforms come and go, brief flashes of fame come and go, and what you need to just keep building up is a steady core loyal audience. There's an old essay on the internet called 1,000 True Fans, which I've read many times over many years. It's very short, so I recommend it to anyone. But essentially the idea is if you can find 1,000 true fans who love what you do and will support everything, then that's enough for a viable career. For example, if I make a book a year, a t-shirt a year, and give a lecture a year, and each of those costs £10, that's £30 for 1,000 people, £30,000 in a year, that's enough to live from. So suddenly you then have a viable career in adventuring through your 1,000 true fans. And that's the key thing to try to chase. And it's not that hard to get. If you get 10 people who love what you do, and they tell 10 people and they'll love what you do, and they tell 10 people and love what you do, then you've got 1,000 fans. So everything I try to do, to ride, to build on I'm aiming to try and do good stuff for those 1,000 people rather than trying to chase anything more ephemeral and instant than that.
Definitely. It does make it seem a lot more achievable, and it really highlights the importance of not trying to please everyone and being a bit more specific about your audience. And then if you know GeoWizard on YouTube, I think he's quite unique in YouTube for doing adventure stuff, in that most people will do sort of 10, 15-minute videos of something that's like clickbaity, and you watch it for a bit, like maybe it's amusing, maybe not. And like they have to really work on like the clickbaitiness of every single one to get people to watch or not. Whereas he'll kind of do the opposite, and he'll do like hour-long videos of things that have stuff that like the average person wouldn't, but he just has such a good audience and he's got like a good sense of humor that people will just carry on watching things. And so he really off-puts most people, but then his loyal audience love him. If that makes sense. And he's done the odd clickbaity thing, but you still wouldn't watch the whole thing if you didn't vibe with him. Yeah, I think it's been a really good way of doing it. He started with gaming, actually, as in he'd do like the guessing of where you are using Google Maps, Street View. And so he'd be doing that constantly. I think he got to like 30,000, 40,000 subscribers, and then he did try to cross Wales in a straight line.
When you said it, I wondered if it was the straight line guy. It just really long, completely bonkers videos. Yes. He's crossing a country in a literal straight line through people's gardens.
He did sort of like just how not to travel Europe, or he's done the same thing with America. But it's like, it's super long. It's like an actual hour for like each day. And it's just not like anyone else. But like, if you're a fan of him, you really get it. And so it's really like something just for his fans, which just really builds his community. But yeah. Anyway, one of my favorite pieces of writing, I think, from you was the stages of flabbiness. I'd love to summarize that for listeners. And was that something that you just had internally from yourself? Or was that something that you kind of noticed in other people from like their questions as well? And that you just sort of tried to describe it with your, maybe I'm asking the second part of the question. You should summarize first. Keep on doing this. Sorry.
The 3 stages of flabbiness, which I'm about to describe, was very much an internal reflection. To superimpose it onto other people would seem extremely rude and judgmental. And the best way to be rude and judgmental is just talk about it on yourself. And then if other people want to reflect on that, that's up to them. But yeah, I realized that I really like being motivated in life. I like having stuff to do. I like being busy. I like having purpose. I like being physically fit. I like challenging myself mentally. And I'm sure we all agree with all of those sort of things. We'll kind of do that. But equally, I also am quite lazy and I'm always looking for an excuse to procrastinate, etc. So I came up with these 3 stages of flabbiness for myself, which I noticed very much linked together. And the first one, physical flabbiness. And by flabbiness, I'm meaning that metaphorically rather than literally. But for example, I try and go for a run or exercise most days. Occasionally, and I achieve that, but only through repetition and habit. So if I miss it for a day or a couple of days, then the 3rd day I'm like, oh, it's a bit wet outside, can't even bother. And a few days go by and I realize I start to slip out of the exercise thing, and that could go on for a couple of weeks or so. And I don't really notice too much at first, but then I notice it moves me on to stage 2, the sort of mental flabbiness, which is that when I haven't been physically exercising and physically keeping myself sharp, then I start to get mentally a bit lazy as well. I think, oh, I can't be bothered to read this complicated book that'll make me clever. I'll just flick through Twitter and stuff instead. And you do that heads down that. And then the final stage, which I rather dramatically label moral flabbiness, is when you realize that you come home one day and instead of going to go for a run or reading a clever book or something, you just flop down on the sofa with a Chinese takeaway, turn the TV on and just slob out there and realize that you're, with all the privilege I have in my life to be born healthy and fit and have a good education and live in a country which gives me opportunities, blah, 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 all of this stuff. I'm just accepting that my life is enough to just slob on the sofa, eating takeaway and watching Netflix. That's just pathetic. And what I really need to do is sort my life out by jumping in a cold river or going for a run, or at least blocking off some dates to commit to the next adventure and getting out there and making the most of my life again. So yeah, they're my 3 stages of flabbiness.
Yeah, I really related to that. You can see why physical exercise is such a part of like self-improvement, of why people talk about that, and that it does just keep you switched on to the other things. And then also the concept is, then you said one of the ways to get out of it is to book an adventure and just make sure that you go and do something, because I think it's sort of like ripping the plaster off of like, you just have to go and do something big to like humble yourself again and remind yourself that like you can do these things. Something I definitely find with myself is if I'm doing too much running or with adventure, I kind of wonder if I'm just running away from something or for something. But with the way you described that, I was like, yeah, there probably is a really good reason. It's a hard question to be asking yourself. In terms of not talking too much about physical flabbiness, but then like mental flabbiness, besides exercise or booking a big adventure, how do you deal with mental flabbiness?
Oh gosh, beyond those things, the mental side of my life, as in using my brain side of life, mostly comes down to writing books. And I find beginning writing books to be a almost physically painful experience. The prospect of starting there with a blank piece of paper and thinking, man, I've got to sit here every day for literally months to write something. And when I finish that, it'll be rubbish and I'll have to sit here for a few more months trying to polish it. And then in a few more months when I sell it, not that many people are going to buy it or read it. What's the point of all this? So the really hard thing for me with books is just beginning it, And the way I overcome that is I have up on my wall a habit calendar, which is like a grid. And every day I have to write 1,000 words and then I can put an X in the box. And doing that the first time is quite hard. And the second time is a bit hard, but then soon I don't want to break my string of X's. So with writing books, the mental side of my life is just about beginning, just forcing myself to begin and to remind myself that although this is quite tedious and painful today, in the long run, what I'll be proud of is holding a book saying, yeah, I've done this book and I hope it might make a difference to someone somewhere. And the only way I'm ever going to have this book in my hand is if I sit down today with a blank piece of paper and write 1,000 words of utter rubbish, and then we'll worry about tomorrow.
Glad I asked that. That's a really nice way of getting yourself started. And I've been really suffering that issue with, like, I started doing like YouTube videos and I was quite proud of some of them, like genuinely funny, like adventurous, inspiring, on your subject of things that you should try and get into one thing. But then when they come into start again, the next one is always, oh my God, there's so many different things to sort of, I just don't even know where to start. And just cracking in and just getting like 2 hours done a day or something is all you need to do. And then like within a few days, you're actually sort of halfway through working out, and then you get into like the fun part of just making fun scripts and stuff. So yeah, so I'm going to make a habit calendar for myself, and cheers. That was useful. I'll let you know when my next video comes out.
Habit calendars are brilliant all round. If I've got out of habit of exercising, I set myself a challenge, like I've got a pull-up bar outside my shed, or I do some sort of press-up challenge. There's a brilliant press-up challenge, by the way, called Bring Sally Up, if you look on YouTube. And you just set yourself this goal of just having a go at it today. And you'll do rubbishly, but you put it down on your chart and then you force yourself every day to just do it. And then in a couple of months' time, you've done it. And it's great. So yeah, the habit calendar is really important for overcoming my physical laziness as well.
The problem I get is like, I'll start a habit calendar and I'll put like 12 different habits I want to do, which is too many, and I don't keep trapping them. And doing just 1 or 2 habits until they become a habit is much better. But on the subject of the Bring Sally Up, Sally Down, that is one of the things I have done pretty religiously. Actually, I spent 1 week during lockdown where I did it every hour on the hour for like 14 hours a day for a week. And it was savage. But by the end of it, oh my God, I was good at press-ups. It's crazy.
That's a brilliant example of you start something, because I saw it that also during lockdown, the England cricket team started doing it and I saw it online. I thought, oh, I'm much tougher than a cricket player. I'll just succeed at this instantly. So I got down the floor and just failed so badly, but persevere for several weeks and you do it. And I think it's just a brilliant step-by-step example. And it's literally, well, day one, it's probably less than a minute's worth of exercise. Everyone can commit to that. So it's the Sally challenge is a really good one for just gradually building yourself up.
That's actually one of the videos I have filmed. I started doing like a different type of press up for each verse, because it gave you like a bit more of a complete like chest workout, doing like sort of wide ones, star ones, like I need to release that one already. Good. Thanks for the reminder. Nice. Semi-big topic change, but it's just something that came up on ChatGPT that I was like, yeah, actually, that's kind of an interesting question. But what was the hardest cultural difference that you've navigated during an adventure, and how did you deal with it? Because if you've been through like so many different cultures, and I'm sure there were some things that you maybe didn't find that comfortable.
That's really interesting. I don't think anyone's asked me that. Thank you, AI. Yeah, geez, we could talk for an hour about the cultural challenges of, say, cycling around the world. But the first thing that came into my head to answer, often when I was cycling around the world, I was on my own, but I often would get invited to stay with families. That's one of the wonderful things about traveling by bike. You stay with families and either stay the night and leave after breakfast, or sometimes they'd say, oh, stay a couple of days and you have a little relax there. Or even you need to sort out a visa, so some family lets you stay for a week or so. And I navigate that all over the world with poor families and rich families and blah, blah, blah. But what's always really interesting is trying to be really savvy and sensitive to not overstay your welcome as a guest in somebody's house. Be really sensitive to when it's time essentially for you to clear off and leave. And I think that's really important and polite to do. And the place where I found it almost impossible to do is Japan, because in Japan, the people are very generous, but they're also, more than in any other culture I've come across, I found completely inscrutable. So if you said to a Japanese family, hello, am I massively overstaying my welcome in your house, and should I clear off? They would say, no, you're absolutely fine to stay. If you ask the same question in England, someone would say, yeah, you're absolutely fine to stay, but you'd be able to read from their tone of voice and body language what they really meant and whether it was actually time to clear off. Whereas in Japan, I found the inscrutability of people's public personas very, very culturally difficult to read. And in many ways, I found Japan the most foreign of all places that I've been to, and a fascinating and wonderful place, but very, very culturally different.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that of all the places I went to, because you'd sort of expect Africa or something to be nuts, which it is, but Japan was the most mind-blowing place of like, oh my God, there's like a completely different way of doing life. And yeah, it's pretty crazy, but amazing. Like, I've really loved being there. But yeah, I did catch stuff a few times and was like, I don't know what you're talking about. So interesting. On the subject of being more adventurous yourself, how do you do that whilst maintaining a relationship with someone that maybe doesn't want to come and do these adventures with you, or understands why you're doing them? Because that's, I don't know, a hard thing when you're trying to prioritize that relationship as well and not make them feel bad.
Yeah, I think any relationship involves trying to find a balance between you, them, the individual, and the overlapping combined team of the both of you, and trying to give each of those three aspects sufficient room to breathe with some non-negotiable, but also maintaining the sort of non-negotiable bits for each of you is a continual, difficult and messy juggling and compromise act. But I mean, going off on adventures is a very selfish thing to do. So try to acknowledge that selfishness, but to respectfully request the essentialness of that selfishness, to try and convey that I really need to go do this thing. And that's not a reflection on you or us. And also trying to repay that selfishness by being extra generous with your time and attention and so forth is a continual tricky balance. And it's one that's impossible to answer with any sort of formula that's going to help any other person, except I suppose to reassure adventurous people that they're probably not alone, but equally that they are also probably selfish and need to give more than they take.
Definitely. Yeah, just doing it in a way that like it's helpful for your mental health, still supports them is important. Then what's one of the kindest things someone has done for you?
Oh, wow. That's a very good question. Well, my parents gave up decades of their own individual hopes and dreams to raise me. So I'm very appreciative of that. I think a good thing about adventuring is that you encounter lots of small kindnesses from people, and often from strangers who are much poorer than you, living in difficult circumstances in difficult countries, and yet they treat you with kindness and generosity. And I think the thousands of tiny little kind, generous acts I've had from random strangers around the world has given me a very, very different position in terms of politics and the layout of our world than I would have had I only stayed in Britain and read the papers. So one random act of kindness, which I was thinking about recently, I was in Alaska in the middle of absolutely nowhere on this dirt road. There's tiny settlements every few hundred miles, and a car went past me and I didn't think anything of it. And a few hours later, it came back again the other way, but this time it stopped. And the lady wound down the window, and on the passenger seat, she had a pile of takeaway pizzas. I guess in Alaska, you have to drive a long way to get takeaway pizza. She had a big stack of them, and she gave me one. She's like, "Oh, we got loads of pizza here. I think you could probably do with one." And then she drove off. And the fact that she didn't ask for anything in return, didn't ask anything about my journey. She wasn't thinking, wow, this is an amazing adventurous dude. She just saw that I was a guy alone, very far from anywhere, and was kind to me and then left. And I think that aspect of it in particular really struck me. And I stood there holding this pizza box in the middle of Alaska and just burst into tears. And perhaps that definitely links back to your earlier question of what's better, pasta or pizza, because I certainly wouldn't have cried over my usual camping pasta that I'd been eating that night.
Oh, lovely. Go her. I guess you have no idea who she is to thank her, but that's amazing. Cool. So one of the things I love about asking this question is that it gives you practical, small ideas of things that you can do yourself to be kind to others. Not that I'm going to be driving around Alaska that much, but certainly when you see random people having a big adventure, it's nice to just do random acts of kindness for them. So that's one to think about. Then, I thought you were about to say something.
No, I was just going so when so many people were so kind to me when I was cycling around the world, that I try and reciprocate that a tiny bit back home when various round the world adventuring cyclists would stay in my house when they're passing through London. And I used to feed them so much food to try and repay it all. But I started to reflect that I think I was a bit weird and pushy. I was like just forcing more food onto people to try and repay the kindness of it. Because I remembered when I was doing that, nothing in the world was nicer than people giving you food. So yeah, it's trying to do a tiny repayment.
Yeah, that is something that people that haven't tried cycling all hours of the day don't realize how much food you have to eat. I did a reel on like just how much food I ate in a day one. And so many friends be like, "What's wrong with your stomach, Sam?" I'm like, it's just practicalities of how many calories you burn. Yeah. Nice. What is one of your earliest ever memories that is vivid? And no worries if it's a crap memory. Just sometimes I have really funny ones from people and sometimes not. It's just a nice question to ask.
My earliest memory is of me kneeling on top of my baby brother. I was about 3 years older than him. So I was about, 4 and he was 1, kneeling on top of him on the living room floor. And there was a big pile of nappies up against the wall. I guess we were going somewhere. So yeah, that's I had no more context of that, but I always held that as being my first memory, me bullying my little brother.
Did you get caught because it was bad?
I would imagine I probably got caught, shouted at and whacked. I would imagine probably what it was.
Nice. Interesting. Yeah, it's definitely like some form of alarming moment that just somehow sticks in your memory. So different for different people. Cool. What's one piece of advice that you would give to your 20-year-old self that you think you really struggled to sort of interpret and probably were told it anyway, but like didn't really realize the gravity of it when you were told it, and why?
I would tell my younger me to slow down and to not try and feel that I had to do and see and conquer everything instantly. So to just enjoy the process and enjoy the journey of all the things that I was doing, literal and metaphorical, rather than just being obsessed about reaching destination, literal and metaphorical. Just slow down. Life is long. I think that would be my main thing.
Yeah, it's like the society today is just more and more about speed, I feel, and like being a millionaire as quickly as possible. And if you're 25 and haven't done like lots of crazy impressive things, you've wasted your life and stuff, and it just makes you feel shit and doesn't help anything. Yeah, it's trying to fit too many things in today, and like addiction to productivity, etc. is just, I don't know, a problem. Lovely. Have you got any questions for me?
Well, what's your next adventure?
Ooh, a few different things. I'm not quite sure. I'm trying to break the 60-second burpee world record at the moment, which is not a external adventuring adventure. It's more of a doing a lot of burpees and really working on different exercise routines. So I wanted to try and do something silly like that before it was too old.
Wow. 60 seconds of burpees is extremely painful.
Yeah, especially when you're trying to do it super fast. Because I've really worked on my technique to the point where you can do so many more in an amount of seconds than you normally would when you're doing them. But it absolutely rinses you. Like, so I get a headache after the 60 seconds doing them so fast. But I've managed to unofficially beat the record by 1 after a few months training. So I'm hoping that I can actually do it under official standards.
How many burpees is that?
It's 33 burpees in 60 seconds. But I can do like 20 in 30 seconds. It's just when you get to like 40 seconds, suddenly your body just goes, "Oh my God, what's going on? I'm going to die. Stop. Please stop." And just been really working on like my muscular endurance and capacity to heave lactic acid out of my muscles and oxygen back into them and stuff. It's been really interesting and been learning different science stuff. So that's
challenge.
The main challenge. But then I want to also go to Nepal and do like a 3-month mountain guiding course there later this year, which would be epic. But trying to do that somehow around having my relationship and things is another issue. Working out how to manage all this stuff. So yeah, I'm trying to have an adventurous year. Hence why I'm trying to do more video and like not think about real jobs and stuff.
Nice.
Yeah. Thanks. Cool. I'll let you know how it goes. Hopefully well. I've never broken anything before. So I'm like, until I've done the first one, I have no idea if it's like possible. It's just like a bit of a mindset thing. I need to look it in and see what happens. But yeah, thanks for asking.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. It's been great to get to know you a bit better. I've enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Oh, no worries. I tried. Thanks so much for coming on the show. As I said, I've always loved the things you've been doing. So it's been a massive yay moment for me to actually talk to you. So cheers.
Cool. Thank you very much.